One of the most common questions we get regarding our 2x dovetail jig is if it can be used using pressure-treated lumber. Well, the answer is yes, if you're willing to do it. So it just so happens that I have a gate to build. Well, and mostly because I have to keep the goats out of my stairway. So we're going to build the gate using pressure-treated lumber. Now I have all the pieces cut out, and it's just a matter of setting up the jig, the router, and getting the mortises and the dovetail tenons cut out. So let's get to it. There is said goat that is the offending source, and this is the lumber that I'm going to be using for the gate. So really I'm just making a square frame. These long ones are going to be where the tenons are cut from, so tenon over here, tenon on the other side, and these are the ones that are the vertical pieces, and they're going to have mortises into them. So one roughly over here and one roughly over here. You can see I have two of each piece. So we're going to start with the tenons because that's the one that I find most difficult, so I like to get out of the way. Okay, so here's a glimpse of how I like to set up my clamp system to actually route this face. So I like to have this face on a horizontal plane like this, so that way when I put the jig on there and the router, I'm actually routing where it's most comfortable. Normally if you have a really long piece, you'd have this jig set up like this vertical, and it's very uncomfortable and kind of difficult to do that, so I like to do smaller pieces where I actually hold the router like this. Anyway, you can see that I have a number of clamps, whatever clamping system works for you, as long as this piece doesn't move in any direction. So this is what works for me. If you have different clamps, go for it. Okay, so to set up this jig, we're essentially going to find the number that corresponds to this 2x4. So in this case, I'm going to go with the number 3, and there's two settings to this. Remember that there's flat, so you see the square peg down here, it's flat with that surface, and the other one it's offset by roughly ½ inch or so. And so I'm going to do it with the flat surface on number 3. And I need to remember that because I need to transfer that same measurement over to the mortise. So you can see that these pieces right here clamp onto the 2x4. So it's a bit snug because this 2x4 is very moist. So I guess it was pressure treated yesterday. The key here is to make sure that this bottom piece is fully supported. So the piece of wood is actually holding this piece in place. Now I can go ahead and drill it, and this really only needs one screw right here. So I'm going to go ahead and drill a pilot hole and then put a screw through it. It doesn't need to be a deck screw, it doesn't need to be something super strong. I use fine thread because all it does is really keep this jig in place. And that's it. That jig is secured as much as it needs to be. Now here's the router that I'm using. It's just a skill router, and I set it up to about setting number 5 for speed. And what I'm using is a 1 1/8 inch dovetail router bit. It's nothing fancy, it's straight from Amazon, and you know, this guy has seen some wear. I think there's a chip on that blade right there, but you know, it's not a $800 bit, it's $15 bit, I think is what I paid for it. And there's a collar, a bearing, and a collar. And the reason it has to be that way is because the transition from the shaft to the actual cutting surfaces is actually, it kind of has an indent inward, so it makes it very difficult to put that bearing in there and not have it slip. So what I end up doing is putting another collar on the bottom and tightening it down. So it ends up a little askew like that, but it really doesn't matter. What matters is that the bearing is flush onto the actual shaft, because that's what's actually going to be touching the jig. Okay, so now comes the most important part of this setup, and which is getting that depth of that router bit exactly right. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up and loosen it, and the goal is to get the full depth of that cutting surface into the wood. So I'm going to lower this until the entire surface is in the wood. And there it is, and that's it. Now we're set. Now it depends on how tight this guy is actually fitting on there. This bracket over here, you can take it off if you need to, but it really doesn't matter at this point. So I'm going to make sure that my router is off, and then I'm going to connect it to the power. I'm going to put on some PPE for this, obviously. Hey guys, here's my big disclaimer. If you're cutting pressure-treated lumber, please, please, please wear some sort of breathing protection. So you could wear a face mask. What I like to wear are these nostril plugs. So these are actually made by 3M, so they actually do filter out. I believe that this is a pretty good alternative to wearing that big dust mask that can get very stinky and sweaty and just kind of cumbersome. Really fogs up your glasses too. So these 3M nose plugs are a lifesaver and a game changer for me. They just go in like that. eye protection and hearing protection. And let's get to routing. Hey guys, so one final thing before I get started over here, I want to let you know the technique that I use for routing this guy. So because the router bit is spinning clockwise like this, it prefers to come in from this hole and cut in this direction about 2/3 of the way. I stop usually around here. Then I turn off the router, take it out, come in from this side, and I hug the outside. I don't bear it against the inside. I hug the outside just a little bit, so I can cut just a little bit off of here, meet up where that cut stopped, and then I hug the inside a little bit, and then I finish that cut. Remember guys, this is plastic. That bearing is spinning at roughly, what is it, 15,000 RPM, whatever it is. It gets hot. It can really melt this plastic. So I do my very best to avoid actually touching the jig at all costs until the very final cut. And then on the final cut, you don't need to really push into that. You don't need to bear into it. Just do a light touch against it, one pass, and that's all it should take. This jig has lasted me about 5 or 6 projects so far, and you can hardly tell I've used it. There's a little bit of wear over here, not any issues. So if you treat it right, it should last you. Alright, so now that tenon is done, let's go ahead and remove the jig. It's a nice looking tenon. So now there's 2 things to do. One is to remove this piece over here, so that can be done with a handsaw. And then the next thing is going to be to plane down this surface just a little bit, because if we leave it at that length, then it's going to bottom out to this surface of the mortise. So we have to shorten the tenon by just a hair. So what I like to use is a handsaw to remove this piece right here. Excellent. So now I'm going to use this electric power planer, and I'm going to plane this tenon from both directions. One going this direction and then one's going this way. I'm going to stop halfway about in both. I actually don't mind if the very bottom gets blown out, because no one's going to see that. The only thing that anybody's going to see is this surface over here. So just to be safe, I'm going to plane it down just one more time. This is on setting 0, by the way. And there we have it. That tenon is complete. Now I'm going to go ahead and do all the other tenons. Okay, so now that the tenons are done, it's time to move on to the mortises. And this is the mortising jig. So it says so right up here. Mortise jig for 2x dovetail router jig. So the same thing, we're going to set it to setting number 3. You see setting number 3? And this bracket has the same configuration as the one for the tenon, which is flat and then that offset right there. So insert it into hole number 3, right there. And then I've already marked out the lines where this needs to be, so the spacing between those rungs is going to be 24 inches. So all I have to do is set it right here. And conveniently at the very bottom there's a sort of an indentation, a little tick mark there, and I just line that up with that center line and screw it in place. So it has a whole bunch of screw holes over here. You don't need that many. I found that you really only need maybe 2 screw holes. So I'm going to go ahead and drill 2 pilot holes in whichever ones. If it makes you feel more comfortable, do the outer ones. I guarantee you that in the center with that 1 1/8 inch router bit, you will never hit that screw, so long as you don't drill it at an angle, right? So it looks like we've used this one before. And put another one right over here. And I don't know if you guys noticed, but I'm drilling the pilot hole towards the bottom of that hole. Obviously my drill bit fits in there with a lot of extra room, and so what I'm trying to do is to keep that jig snug to the surface over here. Perfect. Okay, so now without changing that router bit setting, I'm going to go ahead and route this exact same dovetail. And that's the beauty about this dovetail jig set is that you set that router bit once and you never move it again. So the technique with this one is, because the router bit is spinning like this, I'm going to take sort of scallop shavings until I get all the way down. So I'm going to start over here and do little semicircles until I get to the bottom. If you just cram that router bit in there, it's a good chance that it's just going to get dull and it's going to start to smoke. So in fact, it actually does tend to happen a lot with Douglas fir. I believe this is southern yellow pine, so it's a little bit smoother on that router bit, surprisingly enough. Anyway, let's go ahead and get to routing. Okay, and that is the mortise. So you'll see that over here we have a little bit of tear out. So that is frankly unavoidable. But you have a little bit of cleanup, and all you need to do is use a knife and just get all that stuff out of there. If you really want to avoid that tear out, you'd have to kind of put a piece of wood over here so that when the router contacts that, it does not tear it out. But if you're not opposed to it, you can use some putty and wood filler and kind of put that back in there. Anyway, pretty happy that router bit seemed to cut that pretty darn well without any burning, and it seems to be sharp enough to be able to cut this wood. So I'm going to go ahead and do the other 3 mortises that need to happen, and then we're pretty good shape to be able to put this guy together. Okay. Alright guys, so here is the finished project, believe it or not. So here we have 2 pieces with mortises and 2 pieces with tenons. So I'm just going to arrange them and then dry fit them. So the tenons right in here, there's nothing special that needs to happen to these. Just put them in. Okay. Now let's do the lower ones. Okay, yeah, and those are super tight, and they're meant to be super tight. I'm not going to hammer them in because I do want to add a little bit of glue to them. So the last thing that's going to happen to this is we're going to put a diagonal brace between them. But I'm not going to measure that out until I have this completely in place. So I'm going to take this back out, put some glue, and hammer them home.